I stared at my father in disbelief, his words echoing in my mind like a deafening roar. "Alice, you're a disgrace to this family. Never come back here," he spat, his face crimson with rage. "Dad, please," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. But it was no use. He turned away, his jaw clenched, as my mother stood by silently, her eyes downcast. Ricky's hand found mine, and he gently pulled me towards the door. "Let's go, Alice," he said softly, his voice laced with concern. As we stepped outside, the cool evening air stung my cheeks, still damp with tears. I looked back at the house I had called home for over 2 decades, a place that now felt like a prison. Ricky's arm wrapped around me, offering comfort and strength. "Don't think of us again," my father's voice echoed from the doorway, his words cutting deeper than any blade. With a slam of the door, the finality of his decision resonated through my core. Ricky led me to his car, and we drove away in silence, leaving behind the shattered remnants of my familial bonds. As the familiar streets faded into the distance, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, mixed with an overwhelming sadness. For years, I had fought for my father's approval, excelling academically and striving to be the perfect daughter. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. My brother Greg could do no wrong in my father's eyes, while I was constantly scrutinized and berated. The favoritism was palpable, and my mother's silence only reinforced the imbalance. I had become a mere afterthought in my own family, a burden to be discarded at the first opportunity. As we pulled into Ricky's driveway, his parents greeted us with warm embraces, their concern evident in their eyes. In that moment, I realized that Ricky's family had become more of a home to me than my own. Ricky's mother, Martha, ushered me inside, offering a comforting cup of tea. "It'll be all right, dear," she said, her gentle voice a stark contrast to the harshness I had endured. I nodded, forcing a small smile, but deep down I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The final straw had been drawn, and the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. As I sat on the couch sipping my tea, memories from my high school years came flooding back. It was a time when I desperately sought my father's approval, but no matter how hard I tried, it always seemed to elude me. I remembered the countless nights spent studying, burning the midnight oil to maintain my perfect GPA. Yet, when report cards arrived, my father's praise was reserved for Greg, whose mediocre grades were celebrated as if he had cured cancer. "Alice, you could learn a thing or two from your brother," my father would say, his words cutting deeper than any knife. It was during those difficult years that the opportunity for a summer study program in rural California presented itself. Against my father's wishes, I applied and was accepted, eager to escape the suffocating confines of my home, if only for a few months. Little did I know that decision would change the course of my life forever. The program was eye-opening, exposing me to a world beyond the narrow confines of my father's expectations. It was there that I met Ricky, a fellow student whose warmth and kindness immediately drew me in. Ricky's family, the Thompsons, welcomed me with open arms, treating me like one of their own. Their liberal values and unconditional support were a stark contrast to the rigid, controlling environment I had grown accustomed to. As the weeks passed, I found myself spending more and more time with the Thompsons, basking in their acceptance and the freedom to simply be myself. Ricky's parents, Martha and John, treated me like the daughter they never had, and their love and guidance filled a void I had long carried. It was during those sun-drenched summer days that the seeds of my future were planted. Ricky and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the shared experience of breaking free from societal constraints. When the program ended, and it was time to return home, a part of me yearned to stay behind. The thought of going back to my father's oppressive rule filled me with dread, but I had no choice. As I hugged the Thompsons goodbye, tears streaming down my face, Martha whispered in my ear, "Remember, Alice, you always have a home with us." Those words became a lifeline, a beacon of hope that carried me through the tumultuous years that followed. And as I sat on that couch, surrounded by the warmth of Ricky's family, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would never be alone. Senior year was supposed to be a time of celebration and accomplishment, but for me, it was a constant battle against my father's favoritism towards Greg. No matter how hard I worked or how many accolades I earned, it was never enough. I remember the day I received my acceptance letter from Stanford University, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. My heart was filled with pride and excitement, but when I showed it to my father, his reaction was far from what I had hoped. "Stanford? Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed, tossing the letter aside. "You're not going there. You need to stay home and help support your brother's business ventures." I looked at him in disbelief, my dreams crumbling before my eyes. "But Dad, I worked so hard for this. It's my chance to study agricultural science and make something of myself." His eyes narrowed, and he slammed his fist on the table, causing me to flinch. "Don't you dare talk back to me, young lady. Your brother needs your support, and that's final." My mother stood silently in the corner, her head bowed, too afraid to speak up against my father's tyranny. Greg, on the other hand, simply smirked, reveling in his favored status. "Don't worry, sis," he said mockingly. "I'm sure you can find a job at my company once I get it off the ground." I clenched my fists, fighting back tears of frustration and anger. How could my own family be so blind to my achievements, so willing to sacrifice my dreams for the sake of Greg's mediocrity? In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had spent my entire life trying to please my father, only to be met with disappointment and rejection. But not this time. This time, I would take control of my own destiny. Without a word, I turned and stormed out of the room, ignoring my father's furious shouts. I locked myself in my bedroom and pulled out my laptop, determined to find a way to attend Stanford, with or without my family's support. Hours turned into days as I scoured the internet for scholarships and financial aid opportunities. I applied for every single one, pouring my heart and soul into each application. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, my perseverance paid off. I was offered a full scholarship, covering tuition, room, and board. It was my ticket to freedom, a chance to escape the toxic environment that had held me captive for so long. When I told my father the news, his reaction was explosive. He screamed and raved, calling me ungrateful and selfish. But this time I stood my ground. "I'm going to Stanford, Dad," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "And there's nothing you can do to stop me." His face turned a deep shade of crimson, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But then he uttered the words that would forever sever our relationship. "If you walk out that door, don't ever come back," he spat. "You're dead to me." And with that, I made my choice. I packed my bags and left, never looking back. It was the hardest decision of my life, but in that moment, I knew I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my freedom and building a life on my own terms. Starting a new life at Stanford was both exhilarating and daunting. I had finally broken free from the shackles of my father's control, but the trauma of his betrayal lingered like a dark cloud. Ricky and his family were my saving grace. They welcomed me into their home with open arms, providing the emotional support I so desperately needed. Martha treated me like a daughter, offering a shoulder to cry on during those early days when the pain felt unbearable. Despite my best efforts, staying in touch with my mother was a constant struggle. My father would intercept my calls and letters, determined to sever all ties between us. It was as if he had erased me from existence, a painful reminder of the depths of his cruelty. Ricky and I grew even closer during our time at Stanford, our bond strengthened by the shared experience of overcoming adversity. We found solace in each other's company, a safe haven amidst the chaos of our newfound independence. In our junior year, we made the decision to get married. It was a small, intimate ceremony, attended only by Ricky's family and a few close friends. My own family was conspicuously absent, a glaring reminder of the chasm that had grown between us. As the years passed, I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of the opportunity I had fought so hard for. But even as I excelled academically, a part of me yearned for something more. It was during a visit to the Thompson's farm that the seed of an idea took root. I noticed the abundance of surplus produce that often went to waste, and my entrepreneurial spirit ignited. With Ricky's support and a small loan from his parents, I started a small business, selling the excess produce at local farmers markets. It was a modest beginning, but the response was overwhelming. People were drawn to the freshness and quality of the produce, and word quickly spread about my fledgling venture. Before long, I was securing contracts with local restaurants and grocery stores. my business growing at a rapid pace. I poured my heart and soul into the endeavor, finding solace in the tangible fruits of my labor. It was a stark contrast to the constant rejection and belittlement I had endured from my father, and with each success, I felt a newfound sense of pride and validation. As my reputation in the local agricultural scene grew, so too did my confidence. I was no longer the meek, downtrodden daughter seeking approval. I was a force to be reckoned with, carving out my own path and leaving an indelible mark on the world around me. And through it all, Ricky was by my side, my unwavering partner and biggest supporter. Together, we built a life filled with love, purpose, and the freedom to pursue our dreams without fear or judgment. Little did I know, the seeds I had sown during those early days would one day bear fruit in ways I could never have imagined, leading me down a path of both redemption and retribution. By the time I reached 30, my life had blossomed in ways I could never have imagined. My business was thriving, and Ricky and I had welcomed our beautiful daughter Mia into the world. We lived in a cozy home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the very farms that had birthed my entrepreneurial dreams. Despite the success and joy that filled my days, there was a part of me that still yearned for closure with my family. The wounds inflicted by my father's rejection had never fully healed, and the distance between us had only grown wider with time. It was during this period that an unexpected invitation arrived in the mail. My cousin, Jess, whom I had maintained a discreet relationship with over the years, had sent me an invitation to Greg's wedding. Apparently, she had been kept in the dark about the rift between our families. I stared at the envelope, conflicted emotions swirling within me. On one hand, the thought of facing my father and brother after all these years filled me with dread, but on the other, a part of me longed for reconciliation, for a chance to mend the broken bonds that had once defined my life. After much deliberation, Ricky and I decided to attend the wedding. Perhaps it was a foolish notion, but I clung to the hope that time had a way of healing even the deepest wounds. As we stepped into the lavish venue, I could feel the weight of the past pressing down upon me. Familiar faces turned in our direction, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity. It was as if we were intruders in a world that had once been our own. Greg spotted us first, his eyes narrowing into slits as he approached. "Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal sister," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Before I could respond, my father appeared, his face twisted into a scowl. "What are you doing here?" he spat, his words cutting like knives. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the onslaught of hostility. "Jess invited us," I said calmly, refusing to be cowed by their venom. My mother hovered nearby, her eyes downcast, unwilling or unable to intervene in the unfolding confrontation. Greg let out a derisive laugh. "Clearly she didn't know you were disowned," he said, his voice laced with malice. In that moment, I knew there was no hope for reconciliation. The bitterness and resentment that had festered for years had taken root too deeply, poisoning any chance of healing. I turned to Ricky, my eyes filled with a newfound resolve. "Let's go," I said quietly, taking his hand in mine. As we made our way towards the exit, my father's voice echoed behind us, a final parting shot. "Don't bother coming back, you ungrateful wretch." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had shed too many tears over these people, sacrificed too much in pursuit of their approval. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The ties that had once bound me had been severed, and in their place, a newfound sense of freedom blossomed. Ricky pulled me close, his embrace offering solace and strength. "You tried," he murmured, his voice laced with understanding. I nodded, drawing comfort from his unwavering support. In that moment, I knew that Ricky and Mia were my true family, the ones who loved and accepted me unconditionally. As we drove away, leaving the echoes of my past behind, I made a silent vow. Never again would I allow the ghosts of my childhood to haunt me. My future was mine to shape, and with each passing mile, the path ahead grew clearer, untainted by the shadows of a life I had long since left behind. Years had passed since the disastrous wedding encounter, and I had all but written off any remaining ties to my family. That is, until Greg reached out to me, desperate and pleading for help. It seemed his lavish lifestyle and failed business ventures had finally caught up with him. The golden child, once so favored by our father, had squandered his opportunity and found himself drowning in debt. At first, I was tempted to simply hang up the phone and wash my hands of the whole situation. After all, hadn't they brought this upon themselves with their arrogance and entitlement? But as I sat there, staring at Ricky and our beautiful daughter, Mia, a different emotion began to take root. A desire for revenge, for justice to be served. For too long, I had been the one suffering at the hands of my family's cruelty. Now the tables had turned, and I found myself holding the power to make them pay for their sins. With a wicked smile, I formulated a plan. Instead of outright refusing Greg's pleas for financial assistance, I would dangle the promise of help, only to slowly and methodically dismantle his failing endeavors from the inside out. Leveraging my successful network of contacts and suppliers, I began to subtly undermine Greg's business dealings. Anonymous tips about his unreliable reputation would find their way to potential investors, causing deals to fall through at the last minute. Whispers of his financial instability would spread like wildfire, causing suppliers to demand upfront payments or cut ties altogether. Greg, oblivious to the source of his mounting troubles, would come crawling back to me, begging for more assistance, more loans to keep his sinking ship afloat. And each time I would offer a sympathetic ear, a false promise of support, all the while tightening the noose around his neck. "Don't worry, Greg," I would say, feigning concern. "I'm here to help. Just a little more time and we'll get you back on your feet." But behind closed doors, my actions spoke louder than words. Ricky, my ever-loyal partner, aided me in my quest for retribution, using his contacts to further erode Greg's crumbling empire. It was a delicate dance, a game of patience and precision. Too overt and Greg might catch on, too subtle and the satisfaction of his downfall might be diminished. But oh, how sweet that satisfaction was, watching as the once favored son found himself groveling at my feet, begging for scraps of the success he had so carelessly squandered. With each passing day, the thorns I had carefully planted in his path grew sharper, cutting deeper into his delusions of grandeur. And through it all, our father remained blissfully ignorant, too consumed by his own pride to see the truth unraveling before his very eyes. It was a masterful performance, a symphony of revenge played out in the shadows, where the only applause I sought was the sound of Greg's empire crumbling to dust. The final confrontation came at a community event, where Greg, pushed to the brink of desperation, publicly accused me of sabotaging his business ventures. It was a warm summer evening, and the town square was abuzz with activity. Vendors lined the streets, offering everything from fresh produce to handcrafted goods. It was a celebration of our community's spirit, a time for neighbors to come together and revel in each other's company. As I made my way through the crowd, greeting familiar faces and admiring the wares on display, I caught sight of Greg, his face twisted into a mask of rage. Beside him stood our father, his expression one of bewilderment and concern. Before I could react, Greg stormed towards me, his finger pointed accusingly. "You!" he spat, drawing the attention of onlookers. "You've been sabotaging me this whole time, haven't you?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my lips curling into a cold smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about, dear brother." Greg's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his voice rising to a shout. "Don't play dumb with me. You've been undermining my deals, spreading lies about me to suppliers and clients, all because you can't stand to see me succeed." A hush fell over the crowd, and I could feel the weight of their stares upon us. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The chance to confront Greg and lay bare the truth that had been festering between us for far too long. "You want to know the truth, Greg," I said, my voice low and steady. "The reason you're failing has nothing to do with me. It's because you're a selfish, entitled brat who has never had to work for anything in his life." Greg recoiled as if struck, his face flushing with anger. Our father stepped forward, his expression one of outrage. "How dare you speak to your brother like that?" he bellowed, his voice trembling with fury. But I was done cowering, done playing the role of the obedient daughter. Years of suppressed anger and resentment bubbled to the surface, and I let the words flow like a torrent. "No, Dad, it's time you heard the truth," I said, my gaze unwavering. "For years you favored Greg over me, no matter how hard I worked or what I achieved. You crushed my dreams and disowned me for daring to follow my own path. Greg opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. And you, I turned to him, my eyes blazing with fury. You took everything for granted. You squandered every opportunity handed to you on a silver platter, all while I fought tooth and nail for the chance to make something of myself. The crowd had fallen deathly silent, captivated by the unfolding drama. Greg's facade was crumbling, his arrogance giving way to a flicker of doubt and uncertainty. So no, I didn't sabotage you, Greg, I continued, my voice laced with a mixture of sadness and triumph. Your failures are a result of your own decisions, your own inability to take responsibility for your actions. As the weight of my words settled over him, Greg's shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of the scared little boy he had once been. But the victory was hollow, for in that moment I realized that true redemption could never be found in revenge. The cycle of hurt and betrayal had to end, and it was up to me to break the chains that had bound us for far too long. As the crowd dispersed, murmuring and whispering among themselves, I turned and walked away, leaving Greg and our father to confront the consequences of their actions alone. Ricky was waiting for me, his arms open in a comforting embrace. Surrounded by the supportive faces of our community, I knew that this was where my true strength lay, in the bonds of love and acceptance that had carried me through even the darkest of times. The ghosts of my past had been laid to rest, and as I looked towards the future, I saw a path lined with hope and possibility, untainted by the weight of old wounds and resentments. In the aftermath of the public confrontation, Greg and our father found themselves ostracized, their reputations in tatters. Businesses cut ties, suppliers refused to work with them, and the once favored son became a pariah in our small town. As for me, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. On one hand, a sense of justice had been served. The scales had finally been balanced after years of mistreatment and neglect. But on the other, I couldn't help but mourn the broken family ties, the bonds that had been severed beyond repair. In those quiet moments, as I sat on the porch swing with Ricky and Mia, I found myself reflecting on the choices that had led me to this point. Was my quest for revenge justified, or had I simply perpetuated the cycle of pain and resentment? Ricky, ever the voice of reason, reminded me that I had done what was necessary to protect myself and our family. You stood up for yourself, Alice, he said, his hand gently squeezing mine. You showed them that you're not the meek little girl they once knew. And he was right. For too long I had allowed myself to be defined by the expectations and limitations imposed upon me by my father and brother. But in that moment of confrontation, I had shed the shackles of their control and emerged as my own person, unapologetic and unafraid. As the weeks passed, news of Greg's downfall spread like wildfire through our small town. Businesses he had once courted now turned their backs, unwilling to associate with someone of such tarnished reputation. Even our father, once so proud and unyielding, found himself shunned by those who had once sought his favor. It was a harsh lesson in the consequences of arrogance and entitlement, and as I watched them struggle to pick up the pieces, a part of me felt a twinge of pity. But mostly, I felt a sense of closure, a weight lifted from my shoulders. With each passing day, the bitterness and anger that had once consumed me faded, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and determination. My business continued to thrive, and Ricky and I began making plans to expand our operations, capitalizing on the success we had built together. As we stood in the very fields where my entrepreneurial dreams had first taken root, I couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought me here. From the ashes of rejection and betrayal, I had risen like a phoenix, forging my own path and finding redemption in the most unlikely of places. And as I looked into Mia's bright, curious eyes, I knew that this was the true legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not one of bitterness and revenge, but of resilience, determination, and the unwavering belief that no obstacle is too great to overcome. With Ricky by my side and the love of our chosen family surrounding us, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The ghosts of my past had been laid to rest, and the future stretched out before us, ripe with possibility and untainted by the shadows of old wounds. It was in that moment that I truly understood the meaning of redemption. Not just the righting of past wrongs, but the ability to rise above them, to forge a new path paved with hope, love, and the courage to embrace life on one's own terms. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter in a life that had been hard won, but all the sweeter for the battles fought and the obstacles overcome.